our topic we invited you this morning to talk about when we need to have the tough conversations with our kids, and there's lots of tough conversations. And the reason why I asked for this is because we've had a lot of emails in the last few weeks. I can think of 2 emails where people they said, we've got teenagers and we need to have the talk with them about their diagnosis. And that's a tough conversation. And then there's other conversations that are hard too that have come up. We just have had a lot of mail about that. So should we start with that, you guys, about how do we talk about diagnosis with our kiddos?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Sure. For me, the first thing is making sure that the parents are on the same page, right? It's first communicating with each other. What are the expectations? What do we want to? What information do we want to want them to know, right? It's not just about a label. It's not just about a name, right? Yeah, we can say, okay, you're autistic, but that means nothing, right? There's no understanding to that. So parents and caregivers, and this could go to some extended family too, maybe older siblings, grandparents, aunts and uncles, whoever are really caregiving and overseeing, because we want the message to be consistent. We want the information to be consistent. And then now once we have that consistency, and we all understand kind of what we want them to understand, what knowledge we want them to know, then it's good to start talking to them about it. Sitting down. This isn't a one-time sit down, here's your talk, we're done, right? This is going to come over time. Sitting down, asking them, do you have any questions? First, open up, ask them, because they probably do. Ask for questions. Have you noticed anything? You're in high school now. Do you notice anything different about the kids from high school than middle school? See if they start identifying differences. See if they start bringing up social concerns. See if they start bringing up different, maybe processing issues that they may be having. High school is very fast. Lots of knowledge, lots of things getting thrown at you 100 miles an hour. They're going to class every 50 minutes, right? It's very fast paced. Now you have your building blocks, right? Now you have your blocks that you can address separately, right? You can talk about learning, you can talk about socials, you can talk about processing, you can talk about self-confidence. All of that will lead up to, we learn differently, we have different, abilities, we have different successes, strengths and weaknesses. And then I think it's a personal choice in each family if they actually want to use the formal diagnosis as the information to tell them, or do they stick to talking about each individual block, each individual area of concern, I wouldn't say concern, but an area that they've identified as something that they're noticing in themselves different than their peers, and going from there, right? So there's really no one approach fits all, but for me, it's my recommendations are take it slow, ask questions, right, of the kids, see what they notice, make sure that we have agreement across caregivers on what the approach is going to be, because if they ask me one thing or talk to me about one thing, maybe they're going to talk to my father, grandpa, and ask a different question. Well, grandpa needs to know what we're doing, right? What to say, what is our approach going to be? If he asks Aunt Mary, am I different than other kids? Well, Aunt Mary now will have we've all talked about what to talk about, and she can turn around and say, well, what do you mean you're different? Give me an example. And we're back to question and then an answer. So again, lots of communication, not just communication directly with our child, but communication across all the caregivers that will be answering the same questions.
So I'm curious, Nancy, when was the first time you guys talked to Wyatt and used the word autism? When did you have that talk?
It was when he was about 10, I believe, or 11, that I was trying to explain to him why he had therapists He was going through a phase in of, I don't want teachers, we called them anymore, and really rebelling against having ABA. And I told him he needed extra help because he was like, why do I have to have teachers? And I said, you need extra help because you have something called autism, which means that you need a little help in some of these areas. It doesn't mean you're less than, it just means you're different than the way some people are. And so I kind of came at it from that perspective.
We were a little bit different. I had heard of right after Jem was diagnosed, I heard of someone who had waited to tell their child, and he was like 4, so he was little, and one of the other kids at school told him with very negative language, and that just sent me spinning, right? And I was determined that I was going to fill him with we were going to normalize that word, and we were going to normalize it as something that's spectacular, and like the difference between having blonde hair or brown hair. And that and that we were going to do that so that by the time he went to school, that he was going to be sort of Teflon to anything that anybody would say. You know, very idealistic of me and naive. But so we started using the words when he was 2.5. And then I remember by the time he was 3, we loved American Idol and watched American Idol. And I don't know whether it was when he was 3 or 4-ish, or right around there was when James Durbin was on American Idol. And every time James Durbin would be on, I would say, oh, look, there's James. James has the same name as you. And look, he's so talented. Don't we love? And we danced to James Durbin. And I would go, James is so fabulous. And James is a good singer, and he plays the piano, and James has autism, just like you. Isn't that awesome? You have a lot of things in common with James. And, you know, that was just my thing constantly. So when we finally got to meet James Durbin, you know, Nancy, I just like sobbed, and I was like, I used you as the role model for my son for a long time.
We had him on this show about 7 years ago.
Yeah. But it was a thing, you know, it was like, because you know what I remember? I remember Whoopi Goldberg talking about the fact that when she was a little girl, she saw Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek. And she was like, she is like me, and I am like her, and everything she can do, I can do. And I wanted that same thing for my son. I wanted him to see people who were capable and respected and revered. And autism was just a part of, so by the time he went to kindergarten, we had written a children's, like a social story, like you had a social story for Wyatt. We had one that was just about, and it's called My Name is Jem and I Have Autism. And it's a whole thing of, I have a backpack, and I have parents, and I have a video game, and I have a tambourine, and I have autism. And it's just one of the many things that I have. And sometimes people with autism are young, and sometimes they're old, and sometimes they can talk, and sometimes they can't. And it's just a thing. So I didn't have to have that big talk. I sort of bypassed it like really early. So I've loved all this information though for parents, Vince, about, you know, making sure that you have agreement about it. But I think it's super important to that thing that you were talking about. It's just a difference. It's not a less than, it's not a more than, it's not a get out of literally jail free card. It's, you know, and then the person who explained it to me and said it's the difference between a Mac and a PC. Right.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. And that you can make a Mac do the things that PCs do with apps. But they are still processing things in a different way. So
I love it. I love that. Yeah. And I think that's and again, looking at the other spectrum or the other end, right? I was talking about the older kids, you know, that might just be becoming aware that there's differences, to instituting this very early on throughout their entire treatment plan, which I think is wonderful. The way both of you guys were doing it is great. Again, it wasn't a one-time, I did my checklist, I told him about it, I'm done. Right? This is an ongoing acceptance, identification, not a problem, you know, and you have these abilities and powers and uniquenesses that make you stronger than the next, different than the next, awesomer than the next, and and so forth. And that is a constant learning opportunity for them and self-esteem raising opportunity for them throughout their entire treatment plan. I think that's wonderful.
Hey, thanks for watching Autism Live. To subscribe, click here. And if you'd like to check out some more of our videos, click here.